Yeah. No, the one. Oh, now you guys want to hide, huh? Now you want to hide. You're all loud. Oh, careful. Hi everyone, it's Angelina. I know it's been a bit since my last video and I apologize for that. My house has been a complete zoo with all of us getting sick around the same time, and my husband and I actually got sick at the same time, which obviously kids don't care if you're sick, so it's been hard to recover, but I will get through this. And I did take a vote on my Instagram stories a few weeks ago asking which topic you guys wanted me to talk about next. And majority of the votes went to international versus domestic adoptions. Considering we did do both, again with Luca being from South Korea, being an international adoption, and Cubby, who we adopted here in the US, being our domestic adoption. You would think we were experts, but I am far from being a pro, but I will just tell you what I do know from our experiences. Yeah, it's been hard thinking about how to approach this. I thought I would just tell you how we decided on South Korea when we initially started this process. Yeah, so when my husband and I were initially interested in possibly adopting, at this point we had seen Luca's profile online as a waiting child. I don't know if you remember in my first video me mentioning that, but I also decided to contact local agencies here in California, and there was one in particular that sparked my interest because it was an agency that was trying to get more Korean Americans and Asian Americans to become foster parents or to adopt children domestically who needed homes here. And us living in the LA area, there is a bigger Korean and Asian population, so they were trying to fill a need that they started to see. Yeah, I went there and I didn't know what to expect, but basically knowing this might be a little bit difficult for our families, in my mind, I was pretty much set, at least for our first child, to adopt a Korean child. And as bad as that may sound, there's a lot of thought that went into that decision. A lot of conversations with my husband and a lot of soul searching. We did have that conversation that if it was just me and my husband that we were thinking about, we could totally adopt any race. We were open to it. I was actually shocked that my husband was so open to it, just because he's, you know, born and raised in Korea and came when he was an adult. It was great to hear, but at the end of the day, what I was thinking was more about that potential child rather than us. I thought about a lot of the times that I grew up with trying to figure out my identity as a Korean American and all the struggles that I went through living in an area that was not very diverse growing up. I thought about the hurdles that this potential child might face, even with family and friends who still had stigmas about adoption. You know, A, they would have to get over the fact that we adopted, but B, if it was a child of a different race, I would want my child to feel completely accepted in any environment that we bring them to, especially with family or friends. And not to say that my family or friends would not accept our child if it was from a different race, but just the thought of it took me back to my childhood and all the racism that I experienced growing up. So for me, it was in my heart to adopt a Korean child. I didn't know if it would happen here in the States or in Korea, but that's where my thought process was. And I do want to mention that you hear things from people, comments here and there about people saying like, oh, if you really cared for adoption, or if you really had a heart for adoption, you would just adopt any child, no matter what race, no matter, what circumstance it is. And usually it's the people who are not adopting who say stuff like this. And I don't think it's a very fair statement or opinion, because I think people choose based on a connection that they have with a certain country or a certain area or special needs, whatever it is. It's a connection that they feel being pulled to that particular place. And you shouldn't be faulted for that. Again, it was a very thought out process for me and my husband, because I did read up on some of the transracial adoptees' perspectives of how they grew up and what they felt. Not every adoptee felt this way, but just hearing that, it was very relatable for me, again, being both a Korean and American. So I do in a way think Korean Americans have that unique ability to change the views about adoption in Korea by adopting openly and proudly here in the States. I don't know, again, it's a long story. I can talk about transracial adoption in another post if you're interested, but that's the short end of our decision with Korea. And obviously the other part being that, the culture is very rich in our home, and we wanted to be able to pass that on to our children as well. So when I did visit this particular agency, I remember going in and I'm talking to one of the workers there and saying that we were interested in adopting a Korean child. And this particular person had said to me, specifically Korean, or can you open it up to Asian? And I remember feeling really bad after she said that, and thinking like, oh my gosh. When I researched this group, it was called a Korean family ... agency. And so I thought they understood, like, some Koreans might feel a little bit hesitant to even adopt openly. The fact that, I got to that point, and then now she's saying, oh, you're being specific to Korean, not other Asians. I felt horrible. But again, my explanation with why my heart was so set on Korea, it just felt right to move forward with a Korean adoption. That, and then we found out that through fostering to adopt, basically what happens is a child is placed in your home through the system, and it's usually because, something negative happened in the household, whether, a parent is taken to jail or going to rehab, or maybe there was an accident or something going on in the household, and the child is placed into the system. They match you up with a foster child, so you will be a certified foster parent with this foster child. And I found out that for about a year, the main purpose is to try to reunite this child with their biological parent. That is the goal at the end of it all, which sounds great as long as all the circumstances work out and it benefits the child, but it doesn't always work that way. But for us being brand new first-time parents, I wasn't ready to possibly take in a child and then have to watch this child go away. I think I could do that now, but I don't think I could have handled the idea of potentially not knowing if a child would be mine. And obviously I want what's best for every child. But again, back then it was more like we were ready to have kids and start a family, so it didn't seem like the route for us. So that's when we decided to move forward with our Korean adoption with Luca. And I spoke with the agency, and one thing that you do need to know is that not every agency works with your particular country of interest. So you need to find an agency that specifically works with the country you want to potentially adopt from. So in our case, it being South Korea, the agency we worked with was out of state, and that agency works directly with Korea. But the issue being we needed a local agency who would come to our home and work with us to do our home studies, and then later after Luca comes home to us, be able to do the post-placement visits. So we had to work with 2 agencies, so keep that in mind. Be very diligent in your research. Don't do what we did, because the home study agency we worked with, they had never worked with a Korean adoption before. So they weren't fully familiar with the rules and regulations of Korea. In a nutshell, when we started the process, we were having a conversation with our social worker and doing the research and finding out that Korea takes about 2 years to take custody of the child. My husband and I decided we would start the adoption process, hopefully get pregnant in between, have the baby, and then at the 2-year or whatever mark, bring home Luca. And in our minds, it made sense. And when we told this to the social worker, she didn't see a problem with it. So we didn't think to see a problem with it and just kept moving forward with the home study process. This took about 2 to 3 months, and finally our paperwork was done and we sent it off to our placing agency that works directly with Korea. And a few days later, I think it was, we get this phone call after our Korean agency got our information, and they tell us, well, no, if you get pregnant, you are basically saying you are going to give up your adoption to Luca. That was actually a really hard decision, because we had to decide, were we going to give up trying to get pregnant with having a biological child? If you remember in my last video, I mentioned that whole session about grieving the unborn child. Well, I didn't think I had to, because initially in our plan, we were going to have a pregnancy and then bring Luca home. But now at this point, I found myself having to grieve for this unborn child and deciding, are we going to wait another 2 years if we move forward with adopting Luca to get pregnant? Obviously, you know, we decided to hold off on trying to get pregnant and move forward with our adoption with Luca, because we already felt connected to him and we didn't want to lose our adoption to him. So I grieved the unborn child in my own way, and then we decided to go ahead and move forward with Korea. With international adoption, I will say the hard thing is you have to expect the unexpected. You will probably get a child that is a little bit older, just because of the rules, the policies, the politics of adoption. So again, in our case, Luca was almost 3 years old when he came home, although when we saw his profile, he was 10 months old. So it is a longer process, but I do know that some countries work a lot faster than Korea. And I even heard that Korea now is moving along faster than the 2-year mark. Well, another thing that is a little bit different with international versus domestic adoption is the costs. International adoption is very expensive. I'm not gonna lie, it's very expensive. But my husband and I mean, we don't come from very rich families or anything like that. We were both working and making decent money, and we were comfortable, but it still was definitely an expensive fee. I wish it wasn't so expensive to adopt, but you just pay so much to the agencies and I don't know, to the countries. It's just so many politics and red tape involved. But I mention this because we are average Joes, but we made it work. And I know there's more crowdfunding that's popping up now. Some people do auctions or fundraisers, which I don't think is a bad thing. You know, I've seen comments about people saying like, oh, if you can't afford your child, you shouldn't adopt. And I think that's a very rude statement. So I look at it this way: if you are a parent, you would do anything for your child. If your child was in the hospital, you would pay the bill for that. If you are pregnant and you didn't have insurance but you needed to give birth, you'll pay for that bill. Unfortunately, adoption comes with a high cost and we have to pay the bill for it. So don't look down upon families who are doing fundraisers or auctions to help offset their bill that they need to pay. Yeah, it wasn't fun, but we made it work and we brought Luca home and it worked out in the end. In our case with Cubby, this being a one-off case, not the norm, but basically, if you don't know our full story, where do I even begin? So basically, Cubby's birth mom gave birth already and then was linked to our agency and had requested that Cubby be adopted by a Korean mom and dad. And our agency told us that we were the only ones that were both Korean mom and dad. So our social worker had reached out to us. We weren't planning to adopt again so quickly or at all. We weren't even thinking about the future at all because at that point Luca had only been home for a few months. Yeah, it was a crazy situation, but it was considered a private adoption because Cubby's birth parents wanted that ability to choose which home he went to. And so he wasn't quite given up right at birth. Usually with private adoptions, the birth mom is matched while she's pregnant. But again, since it didn't happen until he was out and in this world, things had to move rather quickly. But private adoptions are still pretty expensive, not as expensive as international adoptions. We weren't planning to spend that much money again so quickly. It was a mess at the time. In order for me to offset the fee for our private adoption for Cubby, I was able to eliminate the lawyer and the filing paperwork I did myself. So that actually cut our adoption fees in half. And then my church was amazing, and they set up a love offering for us, which was, yeah, it was very nice of them. We weren't expecting it, and my friend had asked, if she could just send an email, and I was like, okay, fine. And then the next thing you know, they call us up to the stage at church, and I just felt like, oh my gosh, why are you doing this? But that was totally God just, saying, lose your pride. We want to cover you. Why? Ugh, I hate crying. But he was saying, like, lose your pride, receive, receive, receive. And so we did. And that also helped offset some of the fees. So there is a fee, obviously, when it comes to private adoption and international adoption. But for fostering to adopt, at least here in California, the state pays for everything, such as your home study and all of your paperwork, your fingerprints, which is amazing. So if your heart is set for fostering, that is a benefit for fostering to adopt. And they do offer a stipend to help pay for some of the child's necessities as well. Oh, and they offer health insurance till they're 18. So foster care in California, if you decide that's where your calling is, they do want to make it as easy as possible for you. So if your heart is there, that is a great benefit to think about. I think overall, considering the fact that we did do international and domestic adoptions, if you sit and nitpick here and there of the pros and cons, I mean, there definitely are pros and cons. I wish there weren't so many politics or red tape involved to bring Luca home sooner. Him being almost 3 years old when he came home, he remembers a lot of what happened, but he was at an age where he really didn't understand what was going on. That was definitely an experience that is, and maybe will be for a long time, ingrained in him. We are doing our best to help him understand that, he's in his forever home now, and he seems to be adjusting. And then with our domestic adoption with Cubby, it was great that we were able to bring him home at such a young age. But even being so young, there are some bonding and attachment things that you need to consider. And overall, I think whatever works for your heart and your household is the best way to go. People are just going to say things that might deter you in a way, and you can't focus on that. I just have this example of a person who wants to get married, but they're single. And they say, I want to get married, but I want someone who's kind, and honest and hardworking. Well, if that's the case, what about the person down the street in your neighborhood who is kind, honest, and hardworking? Why not marry that person if you really want those qualities and only those qualities? It doesn't work that way. Your heart needs to be set with where it's set. So don't let anyone decide where your heart should be. A child is a child is a child, and every child needs a loving family and a loving home, no matter where they are in this world. So I hope that our experience will shed a little bit of light in some way for you in your decision making. As always, feel free to contact me if you have anything you want to talk about or want me to go over next. If you want to know when the next video is coming, the best thing to do is subscribe, because I have no idea when this raspy voice is going to go away. So till then, bye.